I'm Tish Jennings. I'm an associate professor of education at the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. I started my career as a teacher, and I spent 22 years teaching kids ages preschool through 5th grade. And during that time, I also worked as an adjunct faculty at a school of education and taught teachers classroom management, and I supervised student teachers. And the combination of teaching myself and working with kids myself and preparing teachers to become teachers gave me a unique perspective. The classroom is an incredibly complex social and emotional environment if you think about it. The average classroom has 25 students in it. If you imagine 25 individuals plus an adult, or maybe another adult, sometimes there's extra adults, in this room, this self-contained room, especially at the elementary level where you're in a self-contained room all day long, and there are all these individual people with their own individual issues and concerns and thoughts and feelings, and then there's the interaction among all of them, so you have kids relating to one another, and then you also have this group energy that forms as a sort of social and emotional body together. And when things are going smoothly, there's a lot of joy, enthusiasm, excitement to learn, engagement, when things are going the way you want. When things are not going the way you want them to be, sometimes it can be chaotic. Sometimes individual children or the teacher become emotionally provoked by something, and once somebody's negative emotions pop up, whether it's a student or whether it's the teacher, it creates an atmosphere, it changes the atmosphere. So the way that the individual people are in that context and the state of mind and emotion that they're in is critical to the whole environment. Now, the other dimension of this classroom that a lot of people don't think about is that everybody in that classroom, students or teachers, are basically captives there. They can't leave. I mean, to leave that classroom, there are adverse consequences. If a teacher can't just walk out, students can't just walk out. And normally, the way humans deal with stress is we try to get away from it, right? So we try to escape. When a human being is feeling stress or they're feeling threatened and this fight, flight, or freeze response is engaged, there's certain ways that are adaptive that help us cope with situations that are actual real threats. So as human beings, we evolved to deal with threatening situations in this way. But the threats that we evolved to cope with are not the kinds of threats we're dealing with today. We evolved to deal with threats like lions chasing us, right? Or actually an enemy attacking us, or a real threat to our physical well-being in our life. Today, most of our feelings of threat come from psychological threat, like threat of not being liked, threat of being embarrassed, threat of looking bad. All those threats are psychological threats. But our body responds to those threats the same way that our body responds to a lion chasing us. Now, when a lion is chasing us, our bodies need this adrenaline to get us ready to run, because if a lion is chasing us, we have to run really fast. So our heart rate increases, the blood flows into our extremities, we start breathing heavily. That's a coping strategy for a real physical threat. But the same thing happens when we feel anxious. The same thing happens when we feel threatened by this psychological situation. If our physiology remains heightened like that for very long, it can cause a lot of damage to our bodies. So one of the reasons why, one of the really critical parts of self-care is being aware of when our stress response is starting to kick in, so we can regulate it, so we can stop it and calm down. Because if we don't, it will increase. Now, the other thing that happens when we're feeling threatened is our thoughts, our cognitive processes reinforce our emotion. And the reason why that is if a lion is chasing me, I need a lot of different cognitive assets to come into play. I need to think in my mind, this is a lion, He's going to hurt me. I better run. I better run. I better run. I better run. You know, so I tell myself that this is a lion. Danger, 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 danger. I'm telling myself that over and over again. My peripheral vision narrows because I'm trying to focus on getting away from the lion. So I'm not interested in anything else going on at all, but just the threat. So all of my attention goes on to that threat. So you can imagine if I'm in a classroom and I'm feeling threatened by a student because a student is doing something that I think is a threat to me in some way, and this could be a real threat or an imagined threat, I'm thinking again, bad kid, trouble, 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 causing me trouble, threat, threat, threat. So that's how I'm thinking about that kid. I'm not seeing all the nuance of this situation. I'm not seeing the context within which this behavior is arising. I'm only seeing through my own mind, and I'm seeing it as a personal affront to me, instead of seeing it as a student who maybe has regulation problems, or maybe they didn't get enough sleep last night, or maybe they're hungry, or maybe their parents had a big fight this morning and they're just wiggly. You know, there could be all kinds of reasons why this student is acting in ways that's upsetting me or making me feel threatened in some way. But the only thing I see is troublemaker. In fact, I depersonalize that child. I'm not even thinking about that child as a person. I'm thinking about them as a little troublemaker that's making my life difficult, who's trying to make my day difficult. So, and that's what the threat response does. It gives us a misperception of actually what's going on. So you can see from that if I'm not aware that my stress level is up here instead of down here, and if I don't learn to calm myself in those situations, then I can be projecting onto my students threat where there is none. And not only am I making myself more uncomfortable and unhappy because I'm reinforcing this feeling that this student is doing something intentionally to upset me, but I'm also creating an antagonistic relationship with this other student. Because if you flip the coin, if you sort of flip the camera around and you look at the situation from the child's perspective, they're not, first of all, they're probably not intentionally trying to upset the teacher. That's rare that they're intentionally trying to do that. They've got their own stuff going on. And when the teacher gets upset with them, they get defensive. They feel threatened. And so when a student starts feeling threatened, depending on their temperament and their issues, they may get really antagonistic back. So they might get more defiant. So you might be reinforcing the kinds of behaviors you're trying to eliminate. The other thing they might do is feel really frightened and shut down and just sort of go into that freeze mode. Either way, they're not, the parts of their brain that are involved in thinking and learning are not engaged. Because the other thing that happens when we feel threatened is our prefrontal cortex goes offline, and the part of our brain that deals with threat and emotion is more salient. So the ability to think and plan and take perspective and understand, the bigger picture, the context, goes away for both the teacher and the student. The teacher's own well-being and their own ability to recognize the need to take care of themselves is critical to being able to create good relationships with students, manage the classroom and deal with classroom behaviors, and also maintain their enjoyment of teaching. If you are a really good teacher, you always see one more thing you could do better. There's always one more thing I could have done, or I could have done this, or I could have done that, or, you're grading papers and you could spend 20 minutes on a paper, you could spend 5 minutes on a paper. If you spend 20 minutes, you do a much better job of grading, but, if you spend 5 minutes, that might be adequate, but then you feel bad. Oh, I should have spent 20. You're always compromising time and quality all the time. And it's impossible to be perfect. It's totally impossible. So this idea that you're never going to have enough time, you're never going to be perfect, you're never going to be perfect, it's impossible, I think is important to recognize. And so what I see is that a teacher who's very devoted to their teaching may end up spending hours and hours and hours working. They may come into school early, they may plan their lessons way in advance, they may put way more hours into the day because they're trying to be perfect. but then they're not taking care of themselves. Then they're not giving themselves what they need. They're not making time for themselves. And I think that is really important, to see that time that they spend exercising, practicing mindfulness, reading a good novel, taking a warm hot bath, whatever it happens to be that you need time for yourself. If you don't see that as part of your sort of job duties, caring for the teacher is important and it's part of the job duties, then teachers will burn out. So you often see these teachers who are incredibly devoted to what they're doing burn out because they can't maintain it. We apply a lot of Barbara Fredrickson's work on positivity and positive emotions to teaching in the classroom. And the way we talk about this is when you're having one of those moments where everything's going well and you're really enjoying teaching and the kids are engaged and teaching is really fun. Those are moments, if you savor them, if you remember them, if you sit there with it and experience the fullness of it and really bring yourself to the fullness of that present moment, that builds resilience. That's what Barbara Fredrickson has found, is the more you remember your positive feelings, savor them, and even record them. Like another thing we recommend teachers do is keep a journal. And the journal it's like an emotion journal, and it can talk about the stressors of teaching and what are the triggers, what are the emotions that we feel, positive and negative. But those times, if we can remember those times when things were going well, when we were enjoying what we were doing, and we can write them down, then when we need to, we can access them. So one of the things we teach teachers to do is use memory to generate positive feelings. So it's not hard if you take a moment and you just think to yourself, remember a time when you were really happy. Just think back into your memory. When was I really happy? And if you just think about that situation and you focus your attention on it and you try to bring as much detail to that experience in your mind, in your memory as you can, pretty soon you'll start feeling that same feeling you had when you were really happy. So it's not hard to generate positive feelings using memory. And we do that a lot when we work with teachers. And you can use that in your classroom with your students too. You can point out those positive times, those positive emotions that your students are having. Like, how are you feeling right now? You look like you're feeling really excited. Are you excited? Do you like this content? Are you interested in this? Yeah. Okay, wow. How does it feel to feel excited? What does it feel like in your body? Like savor it. Just like if you have some really good chocolate and you taste it, or wine. Wine I lived in Napa for a long time. When you're taking a sip of wine, you can taste all the different subtleties of the flavors. What are the subtleties of the flavors of enthusiasm? How does it feel in your body? There's different ways that people survive and cope under these conditions. Some people actually develop really good skills, social emotional competencies that make teaching fun and enjoyable. Other people cope with it by creating a very rigid structure for how they can deal with it. They do things the same way year after year, always the same. And this is a way that gives them a sense of control. I know if I do it this way and everybody does it the way I want them to do it, then it will work. And some of these teachers who've been doing this for 20 years and it works for them, they don't want to change anything because they've figured out how to cope with the situation. It may not be educationally the best for their students, but it gets them through the day. And anybody comes in and tells them to change any of that, that can feel like a threat because I've figured this out. This works for me. If you come and mess with my system, all hell could break loose because then I'm not in control anymore. So I think with teachers that have over many, many years figured out some way to cope, whether for better or for worse, I guess I should say, supporting those teachers, I think we have to be respectful of the fact that they have developed this way of functioning as a way to survive. And if we're not careful of how we approach those teachers, we could they will be more and more defensive because we're basically saying, well, what you're doing is wrong. And if you tell somebody who's been doing the same thing for 20 years and it's working for them, that it's wrong, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard sell. So finding other ways to work with teachers and under those circumstances, I think, is really important. What excites me is that I see that it's possible to really change classrooms. We can do it. It's not that hard, and it's not that expensive either. So to me, it's like an easy fix. It's just that we need to get the word out there.